Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another ISAT webinar. And many of you, if you've attended before, you'll know that the webinars are designed to give high quality professional development sessions to as many ISAT teachers as we can, from the provinces in the south to the provinces in the north. Then we want to reach as many people as we can free of charge. This afternoon, I'm delighted to introduce Andrew Schutzer, who's working and talking to us today about differentiation in the classroom. You'll know that differentiation in the classroom is probably one of the most difficult things we can do. How is it possible to support children that have obstacles in their learning whilst creating progression for the main bulk of the students, and then also extending the more able students? It's incredibly difficult, and Andrew has some really interesting insights into how we can develop this. Andrew's currently working at the United Concord International School in Chiang Mai in Thailand as vice principal, and he's had a range of different leadership posts in different schools. So I will pass you over to Andrew, and thank you very much for you all attending and participating in this ISAT webinar. Thank you. Andrew.
Super duper. Thank you so much for the great introduction. Mr. Stonehouse, are you able to see the PowerPoint okay? Just started sharing it there. All right, it says my screen is sharing, so I'll assume that we're good to go. But thank you very much for the warm welcome. As you mentioned, differentiation is certainly something in the classroom that is arguably one of the most important things, but can be one of the most difficult things at the same time. The things I wanted to go over today is our definition, what differentiation means, how I'm able to do that. We do look at the content, process, and product. These are three things that I think once we start to break things down into these three categories, we're able to really zero in on the type of differentiation that we can actually do. I do believe that these things are influenced by the readiness of the student, the interest of the student, as well as their individual learning profile. So we will talk about those influences. And then finally, we'll talk about flexible groupings. Factors that impact a student's learning. And we'll wait 30 seconds for you guys to do that. If you're working with it, I know a couple folks there's a few people in conference rooms. I'm unable to see cameras or anything, but I know there's a couple conference rooms going on out there, so feel free to talk to your neighbor. All right, super duper, that was about 30 seconds. Now, if you're with a neighbor, I want you to count up how many you have on your list and give your neighbor that many high fives. If you've got 7 on your list, give them 7 high fives. These are some things that really do impact, environmental factors that really do impact learning. We have learning styles, so talking about things like Howard Gardner's different learning abilities. We have prior educational experiences. We're living in Thailand, where kiddos might have been born in Dubai, gone home to Canada for a few years, over to the United States, over to Yemen, and now back to Bangkok here in a school here. So you've got different kids with different educational experiences. Of course, different interests, motivators, readiness levels. That certainly tends to be one of the trickiest things to navigate, as well as personal experiences. So these are some outside factors that I think can certainly influence. You're going to take your piece of scrap paper again if you can, and I want you to jot down and have a look on the right-hand side what you, in your classrooms, in your schools, think are the most least effective to the most effective. We've got practice by doing something, demonstration, teaching another student, audio visuals, discussion, reading, and lecture. I've got my 30-second timer here, so I'll hit start and just take a few moments to do that. If you're by yourself, just do it on a scrap piece of paper. If you're with some colleagues in the conference room, definitely just have a little discussion. All right, that'll be about 30 seconds. So what we have is lectures, reading, audio visuals, demonstrations, discussions, practicing by doing something and then teaching others and imitating it, going from the least effective to the most effective. And a lot of our school actually just finished a round of reading check-ins, and certainly a lot of our data supports this information. And so this is just a chance to realize, oh, you know what? We've got to acknowledge that different teaching styles impact students differently. What does this mean for you? And so as a teacher, we need to think about what our goals mean. Obviously, we've got a chance to really make an impact in the classroom, and so differentiation really can help craft our own professional development goals. Anytime I've got a check-in with a teacher in my building, for example, we'll often bring up differentiation to say, hey, what are you doing in your classroom to reach all those kiddos? And so when you're doing your own little goal setting, checking out the left-hand column, teachers do this. They provide learning options and different paths to learning, different journeys to learning, different chances to make sure that all the concept and information is there. What it's not is a separate lesson plan for each kid in the classroom. When I first started teaching, I would often say, well, I've got 25 different kiddos in my room, all with 25 different needs, so I need to make sure that I have 25 IEPs. I have 25 different lessons. What we need to do is take a step back from that and realize it's not an individual lesson for each individual kid, but we will talk a little bit later in the presentation about grouping and making sure that we are grouping kiddos together so we're able to reach that group. One thing it is to provide appropriate challenges for those students who are at different levels. Maybe they're in the middle, lagging behind perchance, or at an advanced stage. What it's not is just teaching to the middle. It's not a chance to water things down. I know when I went to school when I was a youngster, I would often, upon reflection, I noticed, things were just taught to the middle. I think what we're realizing now is, no, we need to make sure that with flexible groupings, we can definitely hit all the different targets that all the different kiddos have. Now, next, we're discussing how we differentiate. So as mentioned before, there is a chance to look at these things that influence kiddos. So we need to look at student readiness. Where is their skills and their background information? Are tasks a close match for those skills? And we need to start to possibly differentiate the type of assessment or some sort of pre-test or pre-assessment. That's a huge piece of making sure we are meeting students where they are. We also want to make sure that there is the motivation that the kiddos have. What type of things in this class is going to ignite that curiosity and that passion? What's going to keep them engaged? I've chatted with teachers who try to do the same thing every year, but then they start to realize, oh, this particular family of grade 2 students is different than my last year's family of grade 2 students. So every class really does have a different unique structure, a different unique makeup of kiddos. So modifying things as you go along is extremely important. We'll talk a little bit about assessment later on in our chat, but this is where assessment really does start to tie in. Student learning profiles. Each kiddo is a unique soul. So we've got processing a little bit different. Does the assignment require student work that they enjoy doing? So we'll talk a little bit later about making sure we do give student choice. Student choice is certainly something that is extremely important because they're able to show you how they can shine on their terms. Undoubtedly, there's going to be some assessments where you set the clear rules, but oftentimes, if you can offer 2 or 3 different assessment types, that's a chance to give them that choice and give them nurture that sense of empowerment and say, hey, I can now really be a partner in my learning. This is a slide that I probably include 2 or 3 times here in the presentation because I want to keep coming back to it. What we have is, what we're asking teachers to do is to modify and adapt content, the process of the learning, and the product. And as mentioned in the table of contents, this is really influenced by the readiness of the student, the interest of the student, and the learning profile of the student and their individual needs. So I bring back this slide a couple of times just to always kind of come back to it. First, if we look at content, this is really what we're teaching. Our topics, our concepts, and our themes that we're giving to the kiddos. So what we want to do is concentrate on essential understandings and skills and concepts. And we want to make sure we vary the types of materials that we're using. Are we using fiction and nonfiction, primary sources and media? So making sure we're varying the complexity as well as the type of media and materials that we're actually giving to the kiddos. That ties back into what we had said earlier on in the slides, that different kids have different learning styles, referring, of course, to Howard Gardner. So you're making sure that you're giving students what they need and meeting them on their terms. Next, we are looking at the process. So first we talked about the content, but now if we're talking about what's actually going on in our classroom, that how. So what we're doing is we're figuring out ways in which students can make sense of that content, and we're meeting them where they are and saying we're either inputting greater complexity or abstractness into the tasks, and we're meeting them where they are. What we want to do is engage students in critical and creative thinking and increase a variety of ways that we're asking them to learn. I discussed a little bit earlier, and we will discuss again, oftentimes giving student choice is a great way to do that. If you are looking at if you are looking to make sure that they can produce a skill, or looking at regardless of what curriculum you're using, looking at some sort of standard, giving students a choice is sometimes a great way to do that because they have a chance to take some ownership there. Here's where some of that choice can come in. We've got the product of what they're trying to do. So we want to plan units that reflect many ways to represent that learning. And we'll talk a little bit later about tiered assessments, but that's another way we can differentiate and having different expectations for different students. All right, I do want to ask you, at this point, we're going to take another 30-second break, and I'm going to ask you whether you're in colleagues right now in your conference rooms or a classroom, or you're just by yourself, in which case grab a scrap piece of paper. I want to ask you, what types of questions are you then going to ask yourself as a teacher in your unit planning, in your lesson planning? I've got a 30-second timer right here. I'll make sure we follow that. Give you 30 seconds. All right, these are 3 questions that I have that if you've got more than three questions, give yourself a high five. What you want to do with yourself as a teacher is you want to ask, what do I want my students to know, understand, and be able to do? What will I do instructionally to get my students to learn this? I apologize, some of the fonts kind of kicked over a little bit. It looks good on my computer, but I think the way I'm displaying it, some of the words move over. I apologize. And next, how will my students show what they want? So we're looking here at that content process, and then finally that assessment piece, that product piece. Again, we have this, I mentioned that we would bring it back to this. We have our content, process, and product based on readiness, interest, and learning profile. So breaking down differentiation into those three categories really does help us focus. I know when I started teaching, that was certainly the biggest stress I would have, is how am I going to differentiate? But then breaking it up into these three areas certainly helps things a lot. Content is what we want students to know, understand, and be able to do. What is our curriculum? What type of influences is our curriculum having? I know amongst the ISAT family here, we've got a lot of different schools, American schools, schools that follow the PYP, Canadian schools, British schools. That's great. What do we want them to know and understand and be able to do? So having ourselves a good understanding of where our end game is extremely important. Next, we want to talk about content that is differentiated. We have, when we pre-assess student skills and knowledge, then match the learners with appropriate activities according to that readiness. When we give students choice about topics to explore in greater depth, that's extremely important. When I taught in my grade 4 and 5 classrooms, I would often say, hey, let's have a brochure or an essay. Next one, either a dramatic skit or a PowerPoint presentation, or a artistic piece or a computer piece. And so realizing that we can break that up and say, hey, where are you on that continuum? We talk a little bit about the continuum later, but we want to match learners and the activities with their readiness. When you provide students with basic and advanced resources, that matches their current level of understanding. There's certainly some, great resources out there that might give you a newspaper article, but it's written at 3 different levels. Same content, but different levels of understanding. If you yourself are writing up a persuasive writing piece, for example, and you're doing a class example, you might have an advanced piece, a medium piece, and those for the piece for those kiddos who might be lagging behind. So some of that material that you push out is going to be at different levels. Continuing on in our content vein here, we've got multiple textbooks and supplementary print materials. You've got multiple things that you can give them, making sure that this is all links back to the idea of materials. We want to make sure that we are giving varied information. We can have different interest centers. I was a big, in my classroom, I certainly push for a lot of center work. And so you can have 4 or 5 centers in the classroom on the same content, but making sure you're giving different materials at each one. One is going to be the text that they're used to. One is going to be an audio visual on the iPad or the Chromebook that's there. And so you're making sure that you're supporting them with a variety of different systems and a variety of different materials. Audio tapes, we've listed study partners or reading buddies or mentors. We follow a science program at our school where a lot of the content, but a lot of the subjects are the same, but you build on it every year. And so consequently, you could have maybe kiddos in grade 3 and grade 5 match up together. You're still both talking about plants, but you got a situation where you've got your grade 5s mentoring your grade 3 kiddos in some sort of activity. Or just generic reading buddies. I used to love that. It was a chance to have a chat with older kids and a chance to really have them as almost a mentor. Don't forget that with assessment, we've got different types of assessment. Teachers can assess students. You've got teachers can set up a plan. Of course, there are going to be assessment types where you give it to them and you need to know that they can do this writing. They can write this write this piece. And you've also got chances where teachers can design something with the students. I used to work in a school that was a PYP school, and oftentimes we would design final unit projects together with student input. Therefore, their interests are coming into play. And as long as you're making sure that they're hitting those standards, they're hitting what you are requiring of them to do, then all is fair game there. Next, we're going to move on to the process. So how students make sense of that content, and it's the how of the teaching. What's kind of going on in that classroom? Again, my apologies that some of the words are moved over a little bit. It looks okay on my other screen here. I sincerely apologize. It must be a formatting thing on my second computer, so I apologize, but I think the message is still the same. And so the process is the activities that you design to help your students understand these key principles. And it asks students to bring in these key skills that are integral to the unit. We've got a differentiated process when students are engaged in different activities. So we've got tiered assessment, different learning centers, different graphic organizers can help kiddos reach those standards and outcomes. Interactive journals and learning logs. I still remember as a kiddo, our grade 7 science, we had to log so many things, and it was a great opportunity for me to do an activity, but then write a 2-sentence summary. And for me, that's what I needed, or else I'd forget the activity. I'm sure we've all had it. Well, what did you do in school today, son? What did you do in school today? I don't remember, but a chance to summarize and log that information. I actually gave my dad a legitimate answer then at that point. We will talk a little bit later about flexible grouping. That to me is an extremely important piece of differentiation. As a matter of fact, I highlight it in red in a few slides of how important that is. So we do want to make sure, and I've certainly fallen into this trap of, and I've made this error before, where I've had centers, but not all the centers really hit what I actually wanted the students to learn. I might have said, oh, well, that's a fun center, so I'll just put that in there just for the sake of having an additional group. Well, we want to make sure that we do have our activities are focused in on what our standards are and what our focus and outcomes are supposed to be. We are discussing the product. What is the student giving us at the end of this? This is a demonstration of learning, and it's a way for students to show that they have learned and extended their learning. Again, I apologize that the text had gone on to the next line. It looks all right on my other computer, so I apologize about that. Products can be differentiated along a continuum. We're going from simple to complex, less independent to more independent, and we have clearly defined problems to, well, maybe your higher level thinking kiddos are able to start to pick apart more fuzzy problems. Maybe in mathematics, we've got 2 different sets of word problems, 3 different sets of word problems. You've got this group over here working and this group over here working, and that's part of that flexible grouping. Are they at their ability levels? Are they teaching each other? And we'll discuss that in a little bit. I know this is the 3rd or 4th time you've seen this slide, but I really think it's important to come back to it. I still find when I'm teaching in classrooms, differentiation the most stressful thing, because I want to make sure that I'm reaching all those kiddos. And so breaking it down into pieces, I do find a lot more manageable. Content, process, and product. And I'll often, when I'm planning lessons, say, okay, today I'm focusing on how am I going to differentiate this content, the next day, the process, and finally the product. And of course, all of this is based on readiness, interest of the kiddo, and the learning profile is mentioned. And this is where students can help dictate some things that go on in your classroom. And it's great to get that feedback. Sometimes they've got great ideas for a final product that we hadn't even thought of. So looking at those things, we've got readiness, for example. So that's their entry point to a particular understanding or skill, and it's our job to help them grow. I'm sure we've all had it. When I taught 5th grade in Dubai, I had a new kiddo come into my classroom in the 2nd semester. She had just moved from Saudi Arabia, and she said, "Oh, I just did this math unit literally right before Christmas time, and this was in January, because at a previous school it was in a different order." Fair enough. So I needed to start producing some work where I was able to extend and help challenge her thinking. For those who are less ready, they may need help, but they also may need more opportunities, extra practice, more structured activities, and making sure that we are pacing and giving them a chance to have time to actually work on those problems. I think timekeeping is an extremely important piece. That's actually where I've tried and not been successful before. I've said to myself after lessons, oh wow, I did not give him or her enough time to actually work through that problem. I didn't sit down with them and had that conferencing session where I should have had that conferencing session to show them what's going on. Those who are at a more advanced might need some skip practice. You might need to have your questions that are that you write for them more open-ended or abstract. And since they're going to be working at a brisk pace, you need to work that into your lessons. Okay, that this might involve more activities. And so there we are. Interest. We've got a child's affinity or curiosity for the certain activity. Students attach what they've been learning in class to things that they already know. So that's bringing outside things in to class are often a great way. You might be able to relate to a hobby that they have, animals that they like, movies or music that they like. It's a chance for them to actually start to engage. So trying to bring in outside content is a great way. I would like to take another 30 seconds. Sorry, I just showed you the next slide, but I would like you to take 30 seconds with your friends in the conference room, or if you're solo, that scrap piece of paper, to think of things in, this is an extension of what we talked about before, but what, in a student's makeup, what are some things that impact their day-to-day learning? Not necessarily experiences, but things in their makeup. I'll give you guys a few seconds for that. All right, so this is part of the learning profile. If you came up with more than those 5, give yourself a high five, give your neighbors a high five and say, great job, you're a good teacher. We have students that are shaped by environment, their social and physical circumstances, their emotional climate. We've all had kiddos who come in maybe rattled a little bit from an argument with a parent. Psychological factors are extremely important. So realizing that there's certainly always more to a story than when they come in. We've also had kiddos on some sort of diagnostic test. Maybe they're the smartest kiddo in the classroom, yet they scored a 20%. Well, maybe that's just the day. Maybe they didn't sleep well that night or forgot to eat breakfast. And so realizing that all of these things come into the learner profile. And so realizing that maybe that diagnostic test is just one data point. I would suggest maybe doing a retest a little bit later, but also, well, maybe that data point doesn't fit with the rest of their trend. So that needs to be taken into account when you're coming up with final grades or assessments. A lot of this information comes from Carol Ann Tomlinson, a great resource. I definitely recommend looking her up. We did discuss at the beginning flexible grouping and tiered assessments. We're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive there. I did tell you I highlighted it in red. Here we go. Flexible grouping is at the heart of differentiated instruction. I enjoy a lot of group work in my classroom, and that's a chance to really have kids interact and really show you what they know. I like group work because it often, in and of itself, is a piece of assessment, because I can take anecdotal notes as I'm walking around. I can ask students directly, hey, Abdullah, please show me this. Excellent. So certainly flexible grouping is at the heart of differentiation, and we're going to talk a little more about that. Flexible small groups are within class groupings in which membership varies according to ability, maybe same ability or mixed ability. Also interests. Maybe you've got kiddos, you've got kiddos who are interested in the same topic, so they pick the same group for a Bristol board presentation. Possibly learning styles or what they want to produce, as well as making sure these groups do vary in size, anything from 2 to 10. We will talk about this a little bit later, but groups can be teacher selected or student selected, purposeful or random. Sometimes the random groups that you put through a random name generator really surprise you with some great stuff. You can, of course, have students selecting those, or you can certainly be very purposeful and select them yourself. Flexible groupings. We have individuals, small groups. Sometimes the classroom as a whole can be considered a group if you're doing a certain activity. One thing that we talked about time management a little bit earlier, and where I've definitely made some mistakes is making sure that I am seeing all the groups the amount that they need to be seen. So when I taught first grade, for example, I broke up my reading groups, and those were a very purposeful teacher selected group based on what they need. And I needed to make sure that I saw the dolphin group and the tigers group a lot more than I saw the elephant group, for example. And so making sure that you are sticking to that schedule is extremely important. We've all had kiddos who are like, oh my gosh, I really need to make sure I see him. I haven't seen him do some individual work, or I haven't had a conference with him in so long. So making sure that we're tying our time management into flexible groupings. I'd love to take another 20 or 30 seconds with your friends in your room, or if you're solo, that's where that scrap paper comes in. Maybe your cat's running around. I used to have a cat, and I would share some of my ideas with her. I'd like you to come up with, in your groups, what are some things, what are some factors that you could change? Instead of just saying you 5 here, you 5 there, great. But what are some things that you could do to change a group? What's a characteristic that you could assign to a group? I'll give you guys about 20 or 30 seconds. Talk with your friends. All right, that was about 20 seconds. Flexible groupings, so it can be the entire class, it can be small group. You can give kiddos the same materials, but differentiation also tells us maybe you give them different materials. This group really needs the YouTube video on the iPad or the Chromebook. This group really is good at reading, they need the newspaper article. Differentiation tells us we can modify the time. We can finish together, we can finish on different times. Okay, this group right over here, they can have some additional time while the rest of us are quietly reading. You can determine, as the classroom educator, it's your professional judgment, you can determine who's in that group. Or we can put it to chance and say, hey kids, pick your own. That's, of course, brings in classroom management, but that's a whole nother PD. You can place kiddos based on readiness, or you can do it randomly. Also, what are you doing in terms of circulating? Are you helping are you helping or directing any certain groups? Are students teaching each other in that group? These are all ways we can differentiate. I know some lower elementary classrooms have assistant teachers in the room. Great. How is she or he in the classroom helping you? Are they taking a group? Are they taking the high flyers? staring at you, and they've all got 25 unique needs. So to say that it's anything but intimidating is, it's important that we acknowledge that. But with proper organization, it's a place that we can certainly get there. There is a chance for Q&A, so I will stop sharing. There's a question: what is the proper grading system if school is if the school for the practice of differentiation? Actually, a phenomenal book that I read in a book group a few years ago is 15 Fixes by Ken O'Connor. He was an Australian gentleman who moved to Canada and taught there in Toronto public schools, and that was one of the best grading books that I've ever read. So Ken O'Connor, 15 Fixes. He talks a lot about what should be included in grading and a lot about differentiation. And it's like a book that the temperature of your class, but just discussing kind of at the beginning of the year, we all have different needs. We've got and saying, I had one. I'm not too tall, but I'm about 6 feet tall. But the doors were really short at the one school I worked at. So I said I need to duck to get in. I'm not really tall, but that's the way the building works right now. So in grade 3 science, for example, are you understanding all the pieces of a plant? By grade 3 science, you need to understand all the pieces of a plant. Great. How a student shows that to you is going to be different. So you might have a dramatic presentation where kiddos are acting like plants. You might have a Bristol board project. You might have a PowerPoint. You might have some poetry I've seen. But were all those students able to show you? So the content is the important piece, in my opinion, at least, for the rubric. And it's certainly to there an SEN coordinator where there's push-in and pull-outs with the kiddos in classes? Is it a situation where you are offering them more materials because they need to be successful? Are you giving them more time? So it does often mean an individualized education plan, but for you to a chance to be organized and to really know that student inside and out, and to know, okay,